And so we're going to be in the book of Ecclesiastes today. Ecclesiastes chapter 1. And as you're turning there, I would like to just give you a little context for the book. So it was written by King Solomon, who is David's son. And along with this book, it's not the only book that he authored in the scriptures, but he also wrote the Song of Solomon, the book of Proverbs, and a couple of the Psalms, number 72 and 127. I want to talk a little bit about the time in his life when he penned this book, Ecclesiastes. It comes later in his life, and it's actually important that that is the case, and here's why. So we know that Solomon was loved by God, right? We can go through the book of 2 Chronicles, and we can see what happens throughout Solomon's life. God loved Solomon, covenantally so, right? He blessed Solomon greatly because of the promises that he made to his father David. Right? We know this happened. We can see it when Solomon builds the temple for God and he dedicates it to him. It's such a beautiful prayer and conversation that he has with the nation of Israel as he dedicates it. Solomon was very, very aware of God's love for the house of David, which by extension falls to himself as well. So when we think about the things that God blessed Solomon with, he blessed him with resources and military might. Israel had never been stronger as a nation than it was under Solomon. He also blessed him with wealth, extraordinary wealth, as a matter of fact. In 2 Chronicles 1:15, it says that silver and gold were as plentiful as stones in Jerusalem at this time. It was the salad days, if you will. And not just these things was Solomon blessed with. He was also blessed with what he's most famous for, wisdom. He was the wisest man on the planet. He was the wisest man that ever lived up until the time of Christ. These are the kinds of blessings that Solomon received. And in spite of all of this, kind of like we learned from Israel in the readings beforehand, in spite of all of these blessings, all of this favor that God had poured out upon Solomon, his heart turned from God at a certain point. Right? He receives all of these blessings, and years later, we know that he started to go after, his downfall was women, and foreign women at that. He committed the sin that God had actually given the Israelites not to commit as they were crossing over into the promised land, to not go after foreign wives. Why? Not because God doesn't like foreign women, but that it was the gods that they served. Right? If you go after these foreign women, they will lead you after their gods, and your heart will be led astray from me. And that's exactly what Solomon did. And it's after all of the downfalls that Solomon experiences due to his falling away from God that he sits down later in his life and he pens Ecclesiastes. And that's really how he gets his wisdom. And isn't that how wisdom works, right? It's after our greatest failures in life that we happen to gather the most wisdom, or at least we should, so that we don't go back and repeat the exact same mistakes over and over and over again. And that's really what Ecclesiastes is. Some say of the book of Ecclesiastes that it's depressing, and it's not. It's not. I write against that. Ecclesiastes is not depressing as much as it sounds like it is. And actually some have said that this Ecclesiastes is proof that Solomon wasn't even a believer. Well, that's false. He absolutely was a believer. He just sounds like one. He just sounds like an unbeliever. And I would actually argue that he sounds like an unbeliever who's being consistent and honest with himself. So let's go ahead and we'll read our passage. It's going to be Ecclesiastes chapter 1 through 11. We'll get into it here. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 1. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. What advantage does man have in all his work which he does under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Also, the sun rises and the sun sets, and hastening to its place it rises there again. Blowing toward the south and turning toward the north, the wind continues swirling along, and on its circular courses the wind returns. All the rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers flow, there they flow again. All things are wearisome. Man is not able to tell it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. That which has been is that which will be, and that which has been done is that which will be done. So there is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one might say, see, this it is new? Already it has existed for ages which were before us. There was no remembrance of earlier things, and also of the later things which will occur. There will be for them no remembrance among those who will come later still. So as we begin to look at this not depressing text, there are two keys, really three keys. Let me say this. Solomon writes this from two different perspectives. This entire book, Ecclesiastes. There is the perspective of someone who knows God and who fears God, who knows that God exists. And there is the perspective that there is no God, that there is no ultimate meaning. And when we look at what Solomon is trying to communicate here, there's two keys. The first key being that death exists. The fact that death exists is really one of the underlying forces for how he writes this particular section of Scripture. The second key to understanding what he's saying is understanding the word vanity. Right? So right here in chapter 2, we actually, so it's 37 times through the course of Ecclesiastes, he writes this word vanity, and 5 of those times are right here in verse 2. He's trying to communicate something by using this word vanity, but what does it mean? What does it mean? So the Hebrew word for vanity is literally the word breath. The word breath. And what it communicates is that something is fleeting. Breath of air, it's the same word that we see for vapor, right? Man, our lives are like a vapor. Man is a vapor. We're here 1 minute, gone the next. It's inconsequential. It's unsatisfactory. The picture that he gives, the picture that the Hebrew gives is almost like trying to blow a tree down with your breath. It's not going to work. It's pointless, right? And that is the vein that he uses this word. It's pointless. So he says, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. When you use it in that way, vanity of vanity, it's in the exact same way that we would use for the inner sanctuary of the temple, the Holy of Holies. We're talking about that which is pointless. Of all things that are pointless, this is the most pointless. And what is pointless? Everything. That's his argument. Pointless of pointlessness, says the preacher, pointless of pointlessness, all is pointless. Nothing matters. It's not depressing. And he doesn't just say, so since everything is pointless, look at what he says in verse 4. He begins his argument. This is actually his thesis. It's the foundation for the argument that he's bringing here. And he goes directly into mankind. A generation goes and a generation comes. But the earth remains forever. And he asks the question, what advantage does a man have in all his work that he does under the sun? So if you have a KJV or an NKJV, it says, what does it profit a man from all his labor? What is it? There is no ultimate profit that a man gets from his labor. Well, if we look at this from the sense of the world, or from man's perspective, there's a lot that we get from our labor under the sun. Right? I'm sure most of the people in this room, we wake up, we go to work, and we go to work for a purpose. We go to work, there's fulfillment in our jobs. We get money in return for our jobs. That's how we live in this world. You know, that's how we feed ourselves. We go out and we work every day. And it's not as if he's saying that labor and work is bad, but what does it ultimately profit a man from all of his labor under the sun? We go to work. We wake up and we go to work, and then we come home, and then we eat dinner, and then we go to sleep. Rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, and then we die. Because death is the inevitable conclusion for all mankind. Right? And this is what we do. What is the ultimate purpose that a man gets from all of his labor? And you know, just to prove the point that Solomon and the Holy Spirit, God himself, is not saying that labor is a bad thing. I mean, Paul in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 says, if a man will not work, neither shall he eat. We are to work. We are absolutely to work. But what does it ultimately mean for us just to get up and go to work every single day and ultimately die. Let's go a little further. Verse 5. He doesn't just notice this with us, with mankind and his work, but he also notices this in nature as well. Verse 5. Also, the sun rises and the sun sets, and hastening to its place, it rises there again. He also notices it with the wind, blowing toward the south and then turning towards the north. The wind continues swirling along, and on its circular courses, the wind returns. Nothing ever arrives on this earth. When has man worked enough? When does the sun get where it's going? Right? When does the wind, when does it actually arrive? We're caught in this cycle where things just continue to go, and then we die. Not everything else dies, but we die, and then everything winds up going to somebody else. Who knows if that person is wise or a fool, right? I spend so much time in this tired existence of moving from point A to point B, and there's no point B. We're in the world's worst hamster wheel, if you really think about it. We're surviving just to die. That's the perspective that Solomon is writing this in. And the energy that we put into, just as human beings, the energy that we pour into our lives, and it's just continually going to nowhere and going to somebody else. And then guess what happens to them? They die. And then it goes to somebody else. Nobody remembers anything. This is not depressing. We see this cycle, more vain repetition. All things are wearisome. That's actually the word that he uses. Let's go here to verse 7. So verse 7, all rivers flow into the sea, and yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers flow, there they flow again. All things are wearisome, tired, and man is not even able to tell it. Why can't man tell that all things are wearisome? Because we're in it. We're on this road to nowhere, apparently. Right? And it's only when it becomes wearisome that we are actually become aware of just how tired everything is. There's one of the signs of a healthy church is children, and hearing the coos and the cries and all of that. It's a beautiful thing. It really is. But as parents, God blesses you with this child, and it's the greatest thing in the entire world, the greatest thing on the planet, this blessing from God. But after 135 days of not sleeping, this joy that God has given you, it gets wearisome. And if it's not wearisome, you're weary. That's for sure, right? But all of these things, the bloom falls off the rose for everything, and it becomes tiresome. Right? And this is where we find ourselves. This is where we find ourselves in the world, and it's amazing that we're actually able to observe these things. Right? Because creation and nature, they carry on and they can't tell. It's just, if it's a lion out in the wild, the lion is just surviving. It's just living. It's just doing what it does. But we, being made in God's image, can step back and say, man, what is this all for? Right? It doesn't, it happens for, at different ages for everybody, but, there's kids that come to these realizations early, who put people here? Why are we on earth? We start asking ourselves these questions. And realistically, in the vein that Solomon is writing this, and there's no good answer. There's no good answer for this. Well, it's just the way things are, right? We go up and we go to college. Why? Why do we go to college? Why do we have a job? Ultimately, what is the ultimate meaning for anything that we do? And for the one who doesn't know God, they have to say, there really isn't one, right? There is no reason why we do what we do. And when we get into the middle of it, that's when it becomes tired, right? So everything is tired. Everything is wearisome, exhausted, right? That's what he says in verse at the tail end of verse 8, or at the beginning of verse 8. He says, all things are wearisome. Man is not able to tell it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor is the ear filled with hearing. Nothing is ever satisfied. The ocean never fills to the point where it's just good, right? It's just this vain repetition over and over again. I know I'm hammering this point, but it's important that we do this. So it's not just exhausting; it's unsatisfactory. It's never satisfied. Man is never satisfied. Think about, I don't know if anybody in here watches like Shark Tank or whatever, you know. And I sit here and I don't watch a lot of TV, but I like to watch Shark Tank. It's a good show. But I often sit there and I think, I'm like, you know, there's all these guys. You got Cuban and you got, you know, Damon, you got all these guys up here, and all of them have more money than anyone would need in multiple lifetimes. And yet they're still investing every episode. They've been able to go for 13 seasons or whatever, 14 seasons, and they're just continuing to invest money. There's no satisfaction. And they'll even say so, like, I want to make a return on this investment. You know, I'm looking for another $5 million, but they have $1.8 billion in the bank, and there's never any satisfaction, right? That hole is never filled, and that's exactly what we see here. So it's unsatisfactory. Life is exhausting. It's unsatisfactory. We can never have enough of what we're looking for. Look what he says. Look what he says in verse 9. Look what he says in verse 9. That which has been is that which will be, and that which has been done is that which will be done. So there is nothing new under the sun. Not only is it exhausting, not only is it unsatisfactory, it's also unremarkable. Everything that we find on this planet is unremarkable. It's not even noteworthy, really. Because everything that is everything that already was. It's just been recycled. You know, and it's funny because, you know, going through this book with my family, you know, they bring up, well, you know, they didn't have bulldozers then. I'm like, well, that's true. They didn't have bulldozers. But the rock they were moving with the bulldozer is still there, right? And everything that the bulldozer is made out of. It's not as if we went to Mars to get all of the ingredients for a bulldozer. Everything that is in the bulldozer, that it is made out of, is from the earth. We just cycled it together just a little bit differently. It's not that remarkable, right? And I think Ruby works on stuff like that. I mean, they break down. Like it's not a thing where you know, it's unremarkable. I mean, the innovation is cool, but what are we really doing here? It doesn't matter whether we have a bulldozer or you have 30 guys leveraging a boulder with poles. We're doing the same thing. It's not anything new. It's unremarkable. So we have exhausting, unsatisfying, unmemorable, or unremarkable. And then here's the last one. Everything is actually unmemorable. There is no remembrance, verse 11, there is no remembrance of earlier things, and also of the later things which will occur. There will be for them no remembrance among those who come later still. Unmemorable. Exhausting, unsatisfying, unremarkable, unmemorable. I'll throw one other thing in. Depressing. This is a depressing way to view the world. It really is. Solomon has written this passage of Scripture from the perspective of someone that doesn't know God. And from that perspective, he is absolutely right. This rings true to us. If you ever sit back and just read this book, it rings so true to us. Because I guarantee you, at one point in time, maybe even recently, you have looked at the world in this way. You talk to somebody who suffers from depression, and it is almost as if this was the lens by which they viewed everything. I have family members that suffer from depression. For a time in my life, suffered from this as well. But this is exactly how I view the world, and Solomon knocks it right out of the park. He knocks it right out of the park with this. Without God, there is no point. There's no point. There's taxes and there's death, right? The only two guaranteed things that we see. And what we wind up finding, and it is so rampant. And I really enjoyed watching the video that you guys did where you went to the bar and you were talking with people and preaching out in front of the bar, because what's happening in that bar is what happens with people all of the time. We wind up, because there is no point, because there is no end to all of this, and there is no meaning for anything. All we're left to do is eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. We have to squeeze these things into our lives. This living from weekend to weekend, or from vacation to vacation, right? There's the dredge that's in between, the drudge of life that takes place in between vacation A and vacation B. We have to live high to high, right? There are so many addicts, and I get that there is a physical issue that goes along with that, but really that's all we have. That is someone who has submitted to the fact that there is nothing here for us. I have to numb myself, point A, go to work, because how else am I going to afford to numb myself? And now you can use whatever you want to in that, whether it's alcohol, Disney World, whatever. You can put whatever you want there. How can I numb myself from this existence, this tired existence of not ever getting to where I want to go? Not ever having the fulfillment that I'm trying to search for in this place that we call planet Earth. Right? This is where we find ourselves, living from high to high. And Solomon understands, he understands this, that there is no satisfaction, that everything falls short. And he calls it chasing after the wind. That's what we do. We chase after the wind. And even if you catch it, it's disappointing. You know, it's interesting, because when you have this view that everything is meaningless, that there is no point to anything that we have or anything that we do, it's called nihilism. Nihilism. It is, everything is meaningless. And you know, you run into atheists, and I know Ryan runs into atheists all the time. I see it on YouTube, where you'll go to this atheist and you'll say, you know, what matters? What matters objectively? And they'll say, well, objectively nothing. Objectivity doesn't exist. Everything is just subjective. I have to find what matters to me. But that's not the question. What ultimately matters to you? And atheists, the Lord bless them and save them, right? Please. They'll be so inconsistent to say, well, nothing matters, but I can still carve out a little bit of happiness in this life. Well, it's not objective happiness. I can tell you that. It's not a joy. It's fleeting. They're chasing after the wind. It's infuriating, right? Because I bet you there's people in this room that have experienced what it is to know God. And to have God come in and set you free from this slavery, this hamster wheel that we're all on, right? Trying to make a way in this world, and we come out and realize, no, that there is actual joy that can be experienced. There is actual purpose that can be experienced, and it's not just trying to get. It's no longer about the destination. It becomes about the journey, right? I can wake up today and I can serve the Lord. I can go out and I can do His bidding, and it doesn't matter where that is, whether it's at a job, whether it's in ministry, it doesn't matter where it is. I have purpose to my life now because God is, right? And Solomon knows this. He absolutely knows this. If you go to, let's flip forward in the book a little bit. Let's go to chapter 5, verse 7. Chapter 5, verse 7. This is why it's ridiculous that anyone would say that Solomon wasn't a believer. Look at 5, verse 7. He says, for in many dreams, he's taught, this is in the context of man always conjuring up the next thing to do, right? We have these dreams and we go and we pursue them. He actually likens it to a bird that flies away right when you get up next to it. But he says, for in many dreams and in many words there is emptiness. Rather, fear God. Fear God. This is what we are to do. Because there is a God, fear Him instead of going after all of your whims. Go a little bit further into chapter 8. Flip forward into chapter 8. We'll look at verse 12. It says, although a sinner does evil 100 times and may lengthen his life, still I know that it will be well for those who fear God and fear Him openly. Fear Him openly. We'll go to chapter 11. Go down to verse 9. Listen to this word. Rejoice, young man, during your childhood, and let your heart be pleasant during the days of young manhood, and follow the impulses of your heart and the desires of your eyes, yet know that God will bring you to judgment for all of these things. Do we see the difference, the perspectives that he writes this book in? One from the unbeliever, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. The view for the believer, there's a judgment coming. And it changes how we live when we know God and when we understand that there is a judgment coming. This is why the message that is brought to the college campuses or to our co-workers in our workplace is so important, and why we begin with the fact that there is a day of judgment coming. There is a God in heaven who is thrice holy, that is going to call to account every single idle word you have spoken in your life. This is not the place to live from high to high. This is the place where we should fear God, where we should serve God with our entire life, with all of our thoughts, with all of our deeds, with every action. Why our worldview cannot be behind the lens, cannot look through the lens of nihilism. We must see things for how they actually are, that there is a God who judges. Look at the very, very last, it's one of the last verses here. It's actually, we'll read 13 and 14, chapter 12, 13 and 14. This is his conclusion. The conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or whether it is evil. That is a terrifying prospect. Terrifying. For two reasons. A, that it's a reality that God will bring all of our actions into account, all of our thoughts into account. That's terrifying on its own. But the second is we have to keep all of his commands and all of his statutes. We can't do that in and of ourselves. We can't fulfill the righteousness that God requires of us. And as Christians, we're preaching Christ. Listen, one of the reasons that we gather together and we worship God is because he has fulfilled all of these things in Christ for us. Right? He has taken out the heart of stone, the one that doesn't want God, that would prefer to live high to high or vacation to vacation. He's taken that out and he's given us a heart of flesh so that we can revere him, so that we desire to follow his statutes and to keep his commands. Right? And that we put all of our trust in the only one who ever did those things. And it is a beautiful thing. But one thing I'm going to call you to here is I want you to consider just how incredibly sinful it is to look on what God has made, or to look at what God has given you and to not give him thanks for it. And every single one of us in here is guilty of this. And it's crazy. I read this, and today the Heidelberg Catechism. Does this teaching not make people careless and wicked? No, it isn't. This is the answer. No, it is impossible that those grafted into Christ by true faith should not bring forth fruits of thankfulness. Yet I guarantee every single one of us in here, maybe even today, is guilty of not being thankful for what the Lord has given us. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. Even something as easy to pass by as the sun. Look at Solomon's words again. Let's go back to Ecclesiastes chapter 9. Look at this. Also the sun rises, this is verse 5. Also the sun rises and the sun sets, and hastening to its place it rises there again. Boring old sun that gets in my eyes when I'm trying to work or trying to drive. And it's irritating, right? I want you to look at something. I want you to turn to Psalm 19. It's one that I'm sure that a lot of you have memorized. We'll read verses 1 through 6. Psalm 19, 1 through 6. The heavens are telling of the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of his hands. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words, their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, and their utterances to the end of the world. In them he has placed a tent for the sun, which is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber. It rejoices as a strong man to run its course. It's rising from one end of the heavens, and its circuit to the other end of them, and there is nothing hidden from its heat. That is how a believer sees the sun. Not in the way that Solomon has said in Ecclesiastes chapter 1. And my question to you is that how you view the sun? Do you realize that the sun is a ball of energy, a massive ball of energy, and really small compared to other balls of energy in the universe that we live in? It is 93.4 million miles away. It actually doesn't rise, but it has enough power to heat our ball of energy, right, covered by dirt and water, that is rocketing through space at 67,000 miles per hour. That's how fast the Earth travels through space. And it spins at the rate of 1,000 miles an hour. And this ball of energy that we complain about, right, has enough energy to heat, to keep everything alive, to cause everything to grow here. It screams the glory of God. The sun does. And when we consider this is what I'm going to call all of us to. If we can't even look outside and look at a tree, and guys, when we're talking about the incomprehensibility of God, right? We have the sun. It would take multiple lifetimes just for us traveling at the speed of light to get out of our own galaxy. And that's one of billions of galaxies. We're talking about one end of the universe to the other end of the universe. Our minds cannot comprehend that distance. And our God is big enough that He created all of it in an instant by the word of His power. When we're considering the incomprehensibility of God, you want to drive yourself crazy, just meditate on this stuff. And we have the gall, as the one created being, group of beings in all of His creation, to actually not glorify Him because of it. And if this is how a believer is to see the sun, the strong man running its course from one end of the heavens to the other end of the heavens, how am I then to view my wife? Or my children? Or my unbelieving coworkers? Because all of these things were made for them. It was made by Jesus Christ, through Jesus Christ, and for Jesus Christ. And He has set us in it. If I can't appreciate the sun, how am I supposed to view my wife? Someone for whom Christ died. Someone who is being redeemed. Because if I'm being honest with you today, I don't always appreciate my wife the way that I should. I'm not always too grateful to God for my children like I should be. Think about the blessings that God has poured on you and continues to pour on you every single day. And we walk by and we just, thank you. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, my kids have done some crazy stuff over the years. I got 2 boys that are in college. I have not been thankful many times. Repent from your ungratitude. Repent from that. The Lord has blessed us, and He continues to. How do we thank Him? Well, you're never going to be able to thank Him enough. Nobody's ever going to be able to thank Him enough, right? But we revere Him and we fear Him because He does exist. We understand that at the end of all of this, He will call into account. This is the warning to you and to myself also. Everybody needs to hear this. He will call you to account at the end for how you treated that which He has given you. And not just the people and the things, but also your talents. Do you use your talents for the Lord? Because He's going to call those into account too. And we're going to have to give an answer to Him. Right? Have you guys, you want to see how, I don't know, it's a beautiful thing. But you ever met somebody that's just brand new converted? I mean, like 2 weeks after conversion. You know, it's not always pretty. You know, you're trying to cut out sin, and the Lord is dealing with you, but they cannot wake up and go take a shower without glorifying God every moment of the way to the shower. They can't go to the gas station and fill up their car without glorifying God. You know, and we have a prayer meeting every Tuesday that we do on Zoom, because we're, you know, in Clovis, we're spread out, we're not as localized. You know, so you guys have here, we have people from, you know, places in Texas and middle of Mexico that come and worship with us. But we have this guy who joins us, and his name is John, and he's from the Philippines. And he's running he's got a little church plant that he runs out of his house there, and it is the most God-glorifying thing in the entire world to hear what God is doing out of this little house church. And there's a girl that attends his church there, and her name is Maureen, and she's a brand new Christian, you know, and it's fascinating. I mean, she doesn't have 2 nickels to rub together, and most of her family does not believe. They're not believers. She's the lone believer in the house, and she comes to church, and she will sit at church with John and his family, and she'll sit at their table, and she'll be there for 5.5, 6 hours on the Lord's Day. Probably, well, we're like a day ahead of them, or they're a day ahead of us, I can't remember. The time zone is weird, Philippines to America. But recently, or coming up shortly, she will be at the little house church for 6.5 hours just to sit under the preaching of the Lord, because she cannot get enough. She devours everything Christ. And she is living her life in such a way that we all should remember how we were like, because that was probably us at one point, right? Think about what the Lord has given you. Create a gratitude list. Go down that list, and I don't care what's on it. But the Lord, whether it's penicillin, whether you're going through medication, whatever it is, guys, we are a vapor. We are a vapor. And the point to this entire sermon is ask God for wisdom, that He would make us wise to number our days. Because it's true for both the non-believer, the non-believing worldview, and the believing worldview alike, that our life is a vapor. We are very, very temporary. And whether we know how soon our end is coming, or whether we have absolutely no idea, we have to make the most of our time on this planet. And if it's going to be going to work every day and raising up a family, raising up a bunch of Christian warriors in your household, right? If that is the job that God has you to do, let it be done with some thankfulness. Let it be done with some thankfulness. Make us wise to number our days. Let's pray. Heavenly Father,